What is up, y'all? Kevin Kuhn here from Athlete Factors. This is the Athlete Factors podcast. My guest today is track and field royalty and future Ph.D. Shalaya Kipp. How are you?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Thanks for having me. What an introduction.
Yeah, well, that's how we do it here. So, if you're familiar with the steeplechase at all, and I am, then people know who you are, right? Like, people know you. You're kind of a big deal.
Sometimes, yeah, a little bit.
I think you're a big deal. So I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today, not only to talk a little bit about track and field, but also to talk a little bit about what you've been researching in the past and perhaps what you'll be researching in the future. So if you will, please give us a little bit of your background athletically, academically, professionally, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm Shalaya Kipp. I am a middle to distance runner. I started running collegiately at University of Colorado in Boulder, where I learned about this really crazy event called the Steeplechase. And my coach suggested that I try it out. And I tried it out, and I sucked at it. That's how it goes for a lot of people. Don't worry. Literally 2 months later, he said, you know what, I think we should try the steeplechase again. We tried it again, and I did some water jumps on that go around. And he looked me in the eye after 2 water jumps and said, "You're going to be a steeplechaser." I went on in my collegiate career to win an NCAA title in the steeplechase, make an Olympic team, make a world championship team. I think he nailed the event just right for me. So that's kind of my athletic background. At the same time, while I was at CU, I was really interested in integrative physiology. I started working in a lab that looked at biomechanics and energetics of human running. Being a runner myself, I was super interested in what was happening to my body. I finished college, and I wanted to stay and run professionally with my coaches. And the principal investigator, the professor that ran the lab, asked if I wanted to stay and do a master's degree with him. And I said I would absolutely love to do that. So my life continued in parallel, where I kept running, and I kept researching things I was interested in.
Nice. That's so awesome. So there's not too many people who, when it comes to like professional athletics, can do both at the same time. So what was that like?
Challenging. And people ask me how I did it, and I say I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. It's a balancing act. In 2016, it was another Olympic year, and I actually took that spring semester off from my master's so I could focus more on running. Because when you're running at such an elite level, the hardest thing is actually to recover. Like, I could fit everything into my schedule, but what I was noticing in the semester leading up to it was like I was falling asleep during classes. Like, I'd go and do a hard track session, and then I'd go sit through a 2-hour lecture, and then my coaches wanted me in the weight room, and then my coaches wanted me to, do a second, 6-mile run. And, that's what other professional athletes would have been doing. But, trying to add the extra stress of an academic load on top of it made it difficult. So one thing I had to do was say, okay, semester of 2016, Olympic year, really important. Okay, we're going to back off on the schoolwork, and we're going to prioritize running. So juggling and knowing when to put which foot forward, I guess.
Gotcha. That's got to be a nice problem to have from everybody else's perspective on the outside.
Yeah.
Oh, your life's so rough. You have to pick between,
2 really fun things.
Yeah, learning the stuff that you really want to and, being a pro. It's a rough life. That's so awesome now. So did you kind of always foresee yourself being a professional runner and also continuing your education? Like 10 years ago, let's say, what were you thinking your future would be like?
Okay, so like I'm a freshman in college. What do I think freshman in college, I come in to see you. I'm not our top runner. I'm not the top freshman girl, right? I'm not the second freshman girl. Maybe somewhere in the top handful. I
Hmm.
don't even make varsity my first year as a freshman. So no, I had no aspirations of becoming a professional runner or making an Olympic team at that point.
Hmm.
Um, I think gradually as I gained confidence and I really stuck to the training and I really just did what my coaches said. I'm a workhorse. I think then it started becoming more realistic to me to think that running could have a bigger part in my future. As for school, I think I knew the whole time I would do some sort of post-professional schooling after my undergrad.
Hmm.
Most people that go into, physiology or kinesiology will do some sort of education after. I
Hmm.
thought really at that time it would have been more like nursing or a physician's assistant. I didn't really know enough, but I knew I liked that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so yes, I knew I'd continue with education. No idea that running would really still play a role in my life.
That's awesome. Yeah, sometimes like you think you've got everything planned out, and then other times you're like, no idea. Let's just ride the wave and see what happens.
No, and it's great, right? I keep this document on my desktop and it's called The Plan of Life. And it was like all the classes I would take and like my plan for like the next 5 years during undergrad. None of it. Like, right? It's like you make a plan, you follow the plan, you throw out the plan, and like your life becomes something totally new. Um,
That's awesome.
yeah.
So, uh, a couple of things that I plan on talking about were two of the studies. Okay, you know what? Before we do that, let's jump into kind of how we got connected. So I'm scrolling through Twitter, a couple weeks ago, and exactly just, and I see this thread all about ground reaction force, and I'm like, okay, let's see where this rabbit hole goes, and I'm like looking, and I'm seeing videos of triple jumpers and slow motion video of these guys landing, and it's like, oh my goodness, it looks like these huge shock waves traveling through the tibia, and I'm like, oh man, that is rough. um, and then
Real.
yeah, and then I see like what is it, a gif, I don't know how it's pronounced, of what looks like somebody landing at an angle, and I'm like, huh, what is this? And it's you discussing ground reaction force landing for steeplechase. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, this name is familiar. And then
This
kind of,
person's a nerd.
yeah, just like me. So, but yeah, so kind of followed that trail and saw what you were saying, and was like, holy cow, this would be a great opportunity to talk about one of the things that I'm really interested in. Knock on wood, I never got injured doing steeplechase, but yes, but that happens a lot. People get seriously injured. I remember, oh goodness, I couldn't tell you how long ago, 10, 15 years ago, I remember seeing a professional race during the summer. It was somewhere in Europe, and the steeplechase of the men's steeplechase field was like so tightly packed that the guys in the middle to the back of the pack, like they just jump when the people in front of them are jumping because they could barely see the barrier. And some dude jumped too early, came down and smacked his face, boom, right on the barrier. It was bad. They like,
Oh.
yeah, it was really bad. So like, it's a dangerous event. So yeah. So anyway, all that to say, that's kind of how I came across you on the
Isn't the Twitterverse
Twitterverse.
awesome?
Yes, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay. So yeah, like you said, someone tweeted about high ground reaction forces in the triple jump. So I'll start with actually defining what a ground reaction force is, and that's just going to simply be the force that when you land on the ground exerts up on your body, and conversely, the force that your body exerts back down on the ground. If you remember that guy named Newton, forces are all opposite and equal.
Equal and opposite.
There you go. Um, so somebody said, what was it, like 14 units of body weight. So you always normalize ground reaction forces to units of body weight. Because I could say, it was like 1,500 newtons, but that's going to differ between me and like a linebacker. So normalize it to that individual's body weight. And they were bragging that the triple jump was something like 14 times your body weight. And they're like, can anyone up that? And I said, okay, can't really up that. But we know from this study that we did that steeplechasers can exert up to 7 times their body weight. And if you think about it, a steeplechaser has to do that 7 times, right? How many jumps is the triple jumper taking? Anyways, and so
and they get a ton of rest.
And they get a ton of rest, right? And there's also hurdles that you're going over with running, and just the regular force of each step. So
exactly.
I was trying to, help the steeplechasers, look good there. I don't know if that came across to everyone.
I was picking up on it.
You picked up. Awesome.
Yeah.
But really, that's not that surprising, because we know that, steeplechase is known for being this injurious sport, right? People tend to get injured. And it's not surprising when you look at how high those ground reaction forces are.
For sure. So, so it was kind of through that I reached out and I was like, hey, would love to talk with you about this more. And you were like, sweet, let's do it. And you sent me the whole study so I could read it along with some other fun reading materials, which is great.
I felt like I sent you too much after. I was like, I sent him a mathematical modeling paper. Maybe I shouldn't have done that.
I'm not going to lie. I was taking notes, and most of the notes were like big boxes and question marks. Like, I was like, oh, I don't know what this is. Maybe we won't get to that.
Yeah. Start with the steeplechase. Like, what questions did you have from that paper? Like, you need me to explain the methodology more?
Yes. So before we do that, let's jump into a little bit of, in general, let's do this. Before we get into the paper, what are some of the basics of how we can predict and determine running performance?
Oh, okay. So we're taking a big physiological step back.
Yes.
All right. Okay. And we're saying endurance distance running here.
Yes.
Good, because that's the domain I like. Yeah. So in general, we say that the 3 predicting parameters are an individual's VO2 max, their maximal oxygen uptake, their lactate threshold, or the fraction of VO2 max that they run at, and then their running economy. With running economy being my favorite pet variable. That's essentially like your gas mileage. If an individual uses only 5 gallons per mile, or you could think of, I don't know how many calories you want to think per mile. If you use less calories per mile, you're more economical, essentially.
Gotcha.
3 big parameters. Okay.
So what are
with that?
Yes. So what are the basic ways to improve those parameters?
Oh boy. Okay. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of, all this type of training is, for your VO2 max, and this one's for your lactate threshold. In general, I'm going to answer that question more broadly. I'd say the best way to improve those variables is going to be long-term continuous training, right? So really developing that aerobic system, over the course of multiple years, right? So these adaptations take a long time to really produce, especially when we think about running economy, which is probably the variable of the 3 that I think gets the least amount of attention. People love saying, you need to run above your lactate threshold if you're going to actually improve that lactate threshold. But then people don't really talk about how do you improve your economy. And for that, I would say it has to be long duration training with an aerobic base. And my favorite example of that is there is a 7-year follow-up on Paula Radcliffe, who was the former marathon women's world record holder. And they looked at her starting when she was 16, and they followed her over a course of 7 years. And the biggest thing they showed with just this continuous amount of training is over time, her body can figure out, how to tune those tendons. So, They're a little more optimal. Probably there's some mitochondrial adaptations, so she's a little more efficient there. And over time, you see her have like a 6% improvement in economy, which is just huge. So
wow.
That's my kind of broader answer to your question.
That's perfect. That's kind of, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit because that's probably a little bit more related to the other study that you sent me. But I wanted to know your take on that right from the get-go. So
you had to know.
I had to know. Okay.
So we got it out there.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I find so interesting because, like in the weight room, we can make changes neuromuscularly like 6 to 8 weeks. In fact, we can adapt the nervous system almost in real time. Somebody comes into me in pain and they can leave not in pain. Like we can make changes really quick. But when it comes to these aerobic adaptations, like takes a long time.
Buckle down. Yeah.
You got to be patient and you got to be consistent. So that can be frustrating for some people to hear, but that can also be like I've got this one client who he's like, "Hey, I'm not the most athletic. I know I'll never be the most athletic, but I'm willing to do all the things that everybody else doesn't want to do." And so he does all the little things. And he's in it for the long term. He's like, I'm planning out 2 years from now how my performance is going to look. And he gets it. Like he understands.
Perfect. Yes.
So
I love that.
Yeah. And that's why he's training and competing at a level now that is way, way beyond anybody thought he'd be doing like 3 years ago. And he's just
Patience.
Exactly. He just does it. He just sticks to it. So yes, he does. He gets it. So back on track. My bad, y'all. Sorry about it. So can you tell us a little bit about the differences between ground reaction forces, like walking versus jogging versus running versus sprinting? Like what are the differences between all of those things? I've heard a lot lately about some numbers that I haven't actually looked up whether it's accurate or not, but I've heard people talk about sprinting and ground reaction forces to levels that I don't even want to say because I might sound stupid. So if you will, educate us all on that.
Yeah, so there's going to be a ground reaction force for every step you take. And the biggest thing that's going to determine the magnitude of that ground reaction force is going to be primarily the speed that you're walking, jogging, running, or sprinting at. So I don't know what the sprinting ground reaction force numbers you heard, but they can get very high. They can get large, and I'm less familiar with that. To help put it in perspective, I'd say general, easy running. We'll say a 7-minute to 8-minute mile. You're probably exerting 2 to 3 times your body weight while you run. Gotcha. So that's pretty mild. And then that's going to increase as speed gets faster and faster. You start running a 6-minute mile, maybe a 5-minute mile. You could see that get up to, 3-4 times body weight. Yeah, sprinting, I'm scared to put out any exact numbers because I haven't looked at that in quite a while.
Gotcha. Well, I've heard some people say up to 10 times body weight, and I was just like, I don't know if I'm so sure about that.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'd say is when we did our steeplechase study, right? So I just told you velocity really matters. We controlled the speed of the athletes. And so these were all collegiate steeplechasers we had run. And so we had them go off the water jump for males at 9-minute 3K pace and then 10-minute 3K pace for females. And we thought 10 minutes is a competitive collegiate, female steeple time. 9 minutes is competitive for males. If it
it's just a little bit faster than my PR by 10 seconds.
But if it was, people up at, Diamond League, World Champ, Olympic level, they're going to be going much faster, and those forces would be probably higher exerted upon landing.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Gotcha. Sweet. So, so let's talk about the differences between ground reaction forces when you're just running versus ground reaction forces in the steeplechase.
Okay.
So,
oh, sorry.
No,
My
go
sister knows.
ahead.
Oh, okay. I got like excited. I was like, yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah. So actually, to compare everything in our study, what we wanted to say is at that same pace running, how does that change now when you go over a barrier at that pace? Or
Mm,
yeah, over the barrier at that same pace. And the biggest thing we know that the barrier actually does to you is it's going to slow down your velocity. But even with it kind of slowing down your velocity, because you got to navigate, this 30-inch, 36-inch barrier, that force was really large. And in particular, you might be someone that's like me, and I'm a constant heel striker. So every footstep, I'm going boom, 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 boom. But when you land off a dry hurdle or you land off a water jump, you always come down on your forefoot first and then land with your heel. And
mm,
that is very, very important because that means when I'm normally running and I have that nice heel strike, it's going to be my calcaneus that is getting that huge impact peak of the ground reaction force. But now when I land on one of those barriers, it's my metatarsals that is actually going to be experience all that force. And if I never run on my forefeet, or I very rarely do, that's a huge amount of force. And my bones have not gone through the proper adaptations to be able to sustain that force. And it could lead someone like me to be more at risk for a stress fracture in that area if my coaches weren't ever really careful and having me gradually get into steeplechase very slowly. If they had said, Shalaya, go and do, 10 water jumps your first day of practice. No, big no, right? I never had
yeah,
that much force on my metatarsals. They
right.
go, Shalaya, you're doing just 2 water jumps. Okay, 2 weeks later we can start doing 3, gradually let those bones adapt.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I found really interesting in the study was, um, yeah, like that's a novel stress. And if
Totally,
yeah, if you're used to landing on your midfoot, maybe you can transition into doing some water jumps a little bit faster. But
totally agree.
if you're a heel striker and you're not aware of that and you don't know what's going to happen and you just throw in a ton of hurdle volume and water pit volume, like you're just asking for a big problem.
100%. Yep.
So that, yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, so are there big differences between like the amount of ground reaction that's taking place when you're jumping over a regular barrier and landing on the other side versus jumping? Not too many people are hurdling the water pit barrier, right? So pushing off the water barrier and landing either in the water or out of the water.
Okay. Yeah. So a couple of things there to unpack. The first thing that we know that steeplechasers do when they approach a barrier is they want to accelerate. So we might see a little spike in those ground reaction forces because they have accelerated going into the barrier. The second thing I'd say is we also made a force measuring water jump barrier. So when a steeplechaser comes to the water jump, they land on the barrier, or most of them, like you just said, their foot wraps around and then they push off to
Mm,
go across that 12-foot pit of water.
hmm
Um, they've already expended so much energy and they've lost so much velocity to actually get up onto the barrier that force is actually pretty low when they're pushing off. But the important thing we saw was actually how they rolled over and then that horizontal push off forward.
To get them
Yeah.
across that barrier as much as possible
Yeah.
without.
Right. It's
Yeah,
12 feet long. You got to
yeah,
get across that pit of water.
yeah. So here's a little bit of steeplechase strategy, let's say, because I not to toot my own horn, but I could run an entire race dry if I wanted to.
What?
However, most of the time, clearing that water pit jump, I would land on 2 feet and I'd lose all momentum. And then, you're starting from scratch. So is there like, uh, nobody's doing that in a serious race, right? Like everybody's basically pushing off the barrier. One foot is in the water, the next foot's out of the water. You're still running, and that's the way to do it.
Yes, most people. You maintain your velocity better across that jump. And like you just said, that's the most important thing.
Gotcha. So that's the tough thing is if you don't know how to hurdle, then you're probably going to either waste some time in the air or slow way down and jump and land on 2 feet or exactly. So um, I think that was one of the things that I probably put a little too much emphasis on when I was in high school and college was like getting really good at hurdling, which was good,
It's
but like
important.
you are still running 3K, and like the faster you can run a 3K, like the better you're probably going to do. So that's one of those things that I'm like, yeah, but I could hurdle and it looked pretty, but
It's
whatever.
good for all the photos, for sure.
Yes. That's it. I looked pretty awesome, like going off the water barrier, and like sometimes I'd have my arms out like I was flying. It was a beautiful thing. But whatever. Anyway, so what are some of the other important findings, I guess, from this study? Like, what were some of the practical takeaways that you got?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one probably was, how to keep an athlete healthy, where on their foot they were landing, how large those forces could be. That was previously unknown. Yeah, those are kind of the big takeaways from that paper.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was an observational study, right? It was said.
Mm-hmm.
Our question is, how great are these forces? How are steeplechasers landing? And that's what we set out to measure. Also, not easy to make a force measuring water jump pit, right? Force plates can't have water on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that needs to be connected to a computer. So yeah, I should also mention that it was a waterless water jump pit that we made, like the video you saw.
Yeah.
But most people are landing with only 1 foot. It's very little water. It's very shallow. We don't think that water would really help cushion the foot and reduce the force that much.
I think it said what, like max of 10 centimeters of water?
Yeah, I think that was our guesstimate. Yeah, so pretty small.
Yeah, that's a few inches max. Like, I can't imagine that's a lot of force dissipation. One of the things that was, I guess, probably the most confusing for me was the part about the anterior, posterior horizontal forces. So can you explain, like, kind of the difference between, like, when you're just running either on a treadmill or you're just running around a track, like, what's going on there, and how that differs from, like, leading up to a water jump, or not necessarily a water jump, but hurdling in general. So one of the things that I try to coach my steeple runners is to, as much as possible, accelerate into the barrier, like attack the barrier. Because if you're slowing,
I love that phrase too.
Yeah, that was one of the things that my coach taught me. So if you're not accelerating into that barrier, then like you're starting from scratch on the other side. So you want to maintain as much of that momentum as possible. So what exactly is that whole anterior, posterior, horizontal force? Because it was like, part of that was just, I wasn't quite sure.
Okay, so the first thing I should say is we've been talking about ground reaction forces, and we've been talking about them in the vertical direction. So the force being exerted vertically. When we start talking about anterior, posterior, we're now talking about the force that's being exerted front, back. And then the third direction we can measure is going to be medial lateral. So we did measure all 3 directions of force, but always vertical is the largest. And so people get excited and they just talk about that. Yes, but like you just said, anterior, posterior forces, or that horizontal force, is really important because it's force this way. If you have a huge braking force going into that barrier, you've lost all your velocity. In a single step, you're always going to have a small braking phase, and then you're going to have a push-off phase of that same step. If you're running at a constant velocity, those 2 pieces are going to equal each other out. If your braking portion is now larger, you're going to be slowing down. If that push-off phase is greater, you're going to be accelerating. So when you tell an athlete to attack a barrier, essentially you're trying to minimize that braking force, because they are going to have to slow down a little bit, but you're trying to have them slow down not too much.
Gotcha. So
that's my best way to explain it, I think.
No, that's perfect. That helps out a lot, because one of the numbers that I was seeing was like it's, if you're maintaining velocity, then those those forces are balanced out, or they negate each other. But the
like you'd see on level treadmill running.
Gotcha. And then was it like 22 times greater decelerating force or something like that going over a hurdle?
I think that sounds right. I can't remember now.
Yeah, so that was shocking to me. Like, oh, okay, like even when you're accelerating into a barrier or into a hurdle, you still have to stop. Yes.
You do. You totally do.
You transfer that horizontal force into some vertical force so that you can get over that thing. You can't run through it. It's not.
You can't run through it. No.
It's like a balance beam. Yeah. Oh man, that the videos and pictures I've seen of people running into them. It's
compilation videos, steeplechase.
Oh, there's some funny ones of kids landing in water pits, like doing like hitting it and then just flipping over headfirst into the water. Okay, funny story. I went to a college meet one time where people, like, it was so cold. Thankfully, my coach was like, "Hey, Kevin, it's too cold. There's ice in the pit. You're not running it." Thanks, coach.
Good coach.
Yes. There were other kids who had to, but not me. I was special. Thank goodness. So they're like taking an ice pick, basically, or like a big old rod and breaking up the ice. No joke. No joke. And then I went to another meet where someone had put goldfish into the water pit.
I love just for fun. Like that.
Yeah, like that's fun. That's fun.
Yeah. So little rubber duckies.
That's awesome. That's good stuff. So, yeah, that whole research paper I found incredibly interesting. For those who want to dig into that a little bit more, is that open access? Can people get a hold of that?
It's not, but if people either send me a direct message on Twitter or a direct message on ResearchGate, I'm always happy to share it.
Perfect. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So the other paper you sent me, and we talked a little bit about this when we talked last week, that I had no idea about was the paper about, let me pull it up here, the comparison of the energetic cost of running in marathon racing shoes. So can you tell us a little bit about this study and why it's so cool?
Get ready.
Yes.
We're going to footwear now. Yeah. Okay. So that study I sent you is with this, Nike prototype shoe, right? Yes. Unnamed shoe. And if you read the abstract right away, you see there's a 4% savings. So spoiler alert, this is the Nike Vaporfly 4%. This was the prototype of it. So it looked really ugly when we got it. It's not the nice, pretty colors it is now. Yeah. But essentially, all the materials was the same. That Pebax foam was there. The curved carbon fiber plate was already embedded in it. Mm-hmm. And essentially, what happened was Nike asked my advisor at University of Colorado, Roger Cron. They said, "Hey, we got this shoe that we're really excited about, and we want someone to do some external testing on it." And he's like, "Sounds good." So the first thing we say is, "Okay, we got a cool marathon racing shoe that's a prototype. What do you compare it to?" And so we said, well, you should compare it to probably the shoe that holds the current world record. And then the next shoe we chose was, it had 5 of the top 10 marathon top performances ever. So that's the Adios Adidas Boost and then the Nike Streak. So at the time, Dennis Kipmeto was the world record holder, and he had ran in that Adidas shoe, and then the Nike Streak, other marathon shoe that everyone was running in. So we said, okay, we compared this new ugly prototype to these other 2 shoes. Yeah, I know. I keep saying it's ugly.
The picture in the study, it's not pretty. Like it doesn't.
Right. Like I think people forget that because a lot of people say like, oh, placebo effect. Everyone knew this was like the Nike Super Shoe. I'm like, no, we didn't know that. Like it was a prototype. Like it didn't look pretty compared to the other shoes. Mm-hmm. Nike also only sent us size 10 of the prototype. So we got size 10 of the other two shoes, which meant we had to find only runners that wore size 10. And then Nike wanted this to be done in elite runners. So you had to be a male, wear a size 10, and you had to run under a 31-minute 10K.
Wow.
So essentially, we were trying to recruit Cinderella.
Yeah.
You can come to the ball if the shoe fits.
There. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, that's a pretty small sample to pull from.
Hey, we found 18 runners that it worked for, so.
Well, it probably didn't hurt that you were studying it where you were studying it. Like, was everyone local?
Everyone was local, yeah. We had a few guys that were out just for the summer to train. So people love going to Boulder, Colorado for training in the summer. We had a few top-notch guys that were just training out there.
Yeah. That's sub 31 is no joke.
Little quick.
Yeah. I would not have been part of this study. Let's put it that way.
And I couldn't either. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one of the reasons that I find this super interesting, which is also something that was mentioned in the study, is for all those who think that, like, hey, just running barefoot is optimal, right? Like, why is that literally not the case?
Yeah, so one thing that we know with shoes, I'd first say, is that if you add weight to your shoes, or you put anything on your feet, I should say, adding mass to your feet makes you slower. But there's a huge trade-off. If you don't have a shoe actually to help cushion your body, your muscles now have to provide extra energy to cushion your body instead. So while you might not have to carry mass on your feet, your muscles expend more energy to actually cushion yourself. So the cost of cushioning makes running barefoot not ideal from a performance standpoint.
Gotcha. And that changes up your landing mechanics as well, correct?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's why some people like barefoot running. I mean, you'll read people, that have been injured and they try barefoot running and it's great for them. It's fantastic. I think about it solely from a performance standpoint. And don't go and try to, run your fastest 10K without a shoe, because that shoe actually is going to be storing some of the energy for you and releasing it. And if the shoe's not doing that, your muscles are doing it, and that's going to be very expensive.
Gotcha. You've got to land with a lot more knee bend or a lot more hip flexion, or is that the case?
Yeah, a lot of times when you take someone out of a shoe, if they're a heel striker like me, they would transition to a forefoot strike pattern. In that case, it would change your ankle moment. It would change your knee moment. So you get a whole host of changes.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Not moment ideal. Is that rotational force around that joint.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what was the basic setup of this study, and how were you able to compare all of these shoes and all that?
Right. Okay, so we had our 18 Cinderellas, and we had them come in for 3 different days. And on each day, we had them randomized to a different running speed. So one day, that running speed was 14 kilometers per hour. That's about a 7:02-minute mile. Another day, they might have been assigned to our 16 kilometers per hour. That's about a roughly 6-minute mile. And then our third day was 18 kilometers per hour. That's a 5:22 mile. So those are they get up to a pretty fast speed. They could run at those speeds sub-maximally. So this is an individual that can run 5:22 pace and essentially be carrying on a conversation.
Wow.
When they came in for whatever day they had a randomized order of shoes. So they might run in the Nike Streak, the Adidas Boost, and then the Prototype. And then we would mirror that. So then they would run in the Prototype, the Streak, the Adidas Boost. So each trial was 5 minutes long. We got the amount of energy they expended during each 5-minute trial, and then we averaged it together in that crossover counterbalanced effect to get how much energy in each shoe they used.
Nice.
And regardless of speed, what we found was, on average, individuals used 4% less energy to run in the prototype than both the Adidas Boost and the Nike Streak. So that's where that 4% number comes from.
That's so crazy that it can have that much of a difference. And there was basically like no difference between the other two shoes.
4% is huge. Yeah.
It's enormous. Yeah,
it's enormous.
There's basically no statistical difference between the other two running shoes, correct?
Correct, yeah.
It's insane. So what was it that accounted for that huge difference? Because I assume like there's some technology in the other running shoes as well. Like it wasn't like, these were the shoes that had been worn for the previous record and then some of the top, the top performers. So like how can we get such a huge difference?
Yeah. You already have the top shoe on the market and now a new prototype. So in that paper I sent you, we include some hysteresis curves of the shoe. So when we load the shoe up to 2,000 newtons and then we release it, the biggest thing that we saw was, one, the amount of energy that foam was able to store, but then also the amount of that energy it actually gave back to the athlete. So we know that it was both very compliant and resilient. So compliant, it stored a lot of energy, and resilient, it actually returned that energy to an individual. So mechanically, that's how the shoes differed in their structure. Gotcha.
So what role did the carbon fiber plate play into I guess all of that?
Yeah, it's a really hard question to answer, because if we wanted to know, what is the foam responsible for? What is the, plate responsible for? We need a shoe that only has, the foam, or the shoe that only has the plate with a different foam. And we didn't have that sort of setup. So we couldn't say, we think, the foam is doing all this and the plate is doing that, because the way the shoes are set up, we don't have that. There have been some subsequent studies where they've cut the plate in multiple places to see, if you change that longitudinal bending stiffness, how does the shoe perform now? And spoiler alert, it looks like the foam is doing a lot of the work. So
gotcha.
That's about all we know right now.
Awesome. That's super interesting, because like there's quite a few people that I follow on like Instagram who like to talk all about, it's all about the carbon fiber plate. And so buy my carbon fiber insoles, or like you can have the same effect, just slide this into your shoe and stuff like that. And I'm like,
probably not.
Where's the data? Like, show me, because there's like, I had a feeling there was a lot more to it than just the carbon fiber. But yeah, that's one of those things that, so it was probably more so the foam.
That's the guess. Wow. Yeah. Still waiting for some scientists to answer that question.
Why not you?
Because now I'm doing respiratory mechanics like we talked about.
You're busy.
I moved up the body. So many questions I want to ask and answer. Awesome.
So that pretty much covers all of that. One more thing about the running shoe. I noticed that like the ground contact times were different between the prototype shoe and the other shoes. So why do you think that was the case? Why were they touching the ground longer, basically?
Yeah, was that significant? Because now I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was. So it was.
The thing is, there's a second paper to that paper which I held back on sending to you, where we do a full, gait analysis. We did 3-dimensional motion capture with the force measuring treadmill, and I think it no longer was significant.
Okay.
So it would have been this beautiful story if it increased contact time.
Yeah.
But I think overall, actually, couldn't really explain it with contact time. Couldn't explain it with stride length or stride frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the ground reaction profiles. I mean, you saw the figure. They look slightly different, but nothing was significant there. So we couldn't really tell it apart there. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that answers that question.
In the second paper, we do look at the MTP joint, your metatarsal pharyngeal joint, and it looks like there is some good savings happening down at that level.
Interesting. Alrighty. Well, future podcast then.
Okay.
I think that about covered it. with that. Did I have any other? Oh, one last question. So at the beginning of the paper, you made a prediction with regards to how much of an improvement would have to be altered in running economy in order to elicit a sub 2-hour marathon. So how did that whole thing play out for those people who were unaware of kind of how things went?
Wait, is this the second paper?
I don't think so.
Oh man, okay. Okay, so well, anyways, I'm going to jump into this and say something. So one thing is we know that a 4% improvement in economy doesn't mean necessarily you're going to run 4% faster.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that is that when you look at the relationship between speed and VO2, or you can think energy, we know it's not a linear relationship. It's actually slightly curvilinear. Part of that is due to when you start running at really fast speeds, there's a lot more air resistance against you. So you have to exert more energy to run at those faster speeds. And then there's also some intrinsic properties that I don't think people have really come to a conclusion of why, because even on a treadmill, you'll see it slightly start to be curvilinear instead of linear. So all to say is that we can say 4% improvement in economy, but we have to say how much faster does that make you if we're going to break the 2-hour barrier? And what did we predict we needed?
I think it was about 4%. Am I right?
About 4%, right? And so is it a big surprise maybe now? That has been broken. The other thing I would say is we say it's 4% on average, but there was a range for how much people would save. We saw some people closer down to the 2% level and other people up to 6%. But the biggest thing is all 18 runners, were saving energy in the shoe. Even if they thought the shoe was ugly, even if they told us they didn't like the shoe, everyone saved.
Even if they were a heel striker or a midfoot striker, it didn't matter.
Yeah, there was no difference in strike pattern either. Yeah, great point.
It's crazy. That part blew my mind. I was like, what? No way. That's so cool. So that was super interesting to me. So those two studies, super fascinating. Again, if anybody wants to read them, I assume they can just contact you to kind of get a hold of that.
Yeah, contact me. The one in Sports Med, our marathon prototype shoe, that one might be open access. If you can't reach it, send me a direct message on Twitter. I check it every so often. I'll send you the paper.
Awesome. Well, sweet. This has been incredible. I think I'm now starting to understand that third study a little bit better, just because it's talking, I guess, a little bit more about why there's that curvilinear pattern instead of linear pattern. I like
the application. Yeah. That's why I had to send it to you.
Yeah. Well, I will reread it, and we'll be able to discuss that hopefully in the future. And but yeah,
sounds good.
They were just big chunks where I was like, I don't know what any of this means. This is too much math for me. But I'll give it another try. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been so much fun. Thanks
for having me. This has been a blast.
For sure. It's been such an honor just to talk with you a little bit. One thing we didn't get to talk a little bit about was like if you're still training and kind of what your training goals are.
About that.
No. So what's the case there? What's going on?
Yeah. I'm still running. Running with a Ph.D. is a little tricky. And also, right, like pandemic, I can't get across the border to go race. Mm-hmm. As nice as it would be to, drive down. I'm in Vancouver, BC, in Canada right now. As nice as it would be to go down to Seattle and race, something at an indoor meet, I can't actually cross the border. The border is closed. So that's made it a little tricky. Yeah, but I'm having fun running, doing a little training here and there. We'll see what 2021 brings.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And tell us a little bit about what you're currently researching and kind of what you plan on doing for your dissertation.
Right. Okay. So I left Colorado, really sad, up here in Vancouver at the University of British Columbia. I'm now working with Bill Scheel. He looks at exercise physiology and specifically the respiratory system during exercise. I'm still interested in mechanics. He has a three-dimensional motion capture system, really similar to what we used in some of the studies we just talked about. But it looks at how respiratory mechanics change with exercise. So I've gone from putting reflective markers on people's shoes to now putting them on people's chests.
Wow.
I'm still interested in energy costs. But now I want to just say how much, as I said, money. How much energy does just the respiratory muscle use, right? Like that's how I think about energy. Wow. That's what I'm doing up here now.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. So I wrote a book about how to make your diet like self-reliant. It's called Self-Reliant Diet. Like I teach you how to calculate your caloric need and figure out, whatever macros you want to set, but it's all based off this idea of calories are currency. Like it's money. It's your body's money. It's just money. So
it is.
Yeah. So that makes sense to me. So how can people follow your work? How can they reach out to you? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So super secret hard Twitter name. No, it's just at Shalaya Kipp. I'm at Shalaya Kipp on Twitter and Instagram. I'm probably a little more active on Twitter. If you follow me, it's really sciencey and nerdy, so buckle down.
Nothing wrong with that. Awesome. And perfect. Everybody go follow her right now because you'll get to see really cool stuff and you'll get to learn a lot. And
seriously, reach out if anyone wants, a copy of the study. I'm always happy to pass it along.
Yeah, makes for like a cool story that you can tell all your friends. Like, no big deal. An Olympian sent me some of her papers. Whatever. It's cool. Like, I think it's cool anyway. Awesome. Shalaya, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Cannot wait to reread this paper and get you back onto the podcast again
Kevin,
in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Alrighty, y'all. Thanks for watching and listening, and stay tuned to next week's episode. Adios.